Okay, we have reached the 12 o'clock hour. And hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Local Policies for Native Plants webinar today. This is actually the first event in the Landscapes at Last webinar series that's being brought to you from the North Carolina Sea Grant and the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. My name is Gloria Putnam. I help coordinate the CLI and the Coastal Landscapes Initiative, and I'm on staff at the North Carolina Sea Grant that that and based here at NC State University. So we really are excited to have you here today. We had over 300 people register for the event. We are going to be sharing the recording with everyone that registered, and we will post it online down the road. We are really glad to have you with us, and we thank you for your interest in this topic. We will also be sending you a 4-question survey in a day, and we hope that you will take just a few minutes to complete that, give us some feedback. With this webinar series, we are hoping to reach a variety of audiences over the coming year, and we're still planning many of the events, but you can find them on our main CLI website. This is the URL and the QR code to get you there. You'll also find a number of our products, or all of our products actually, that are on the webpage that we've developed in collaboration with our partners. Many of these documents are nature plant centric. And we're making some assumptions today about the knowledge that you have when you're coming to this webinar. One is that you have a general understanding of how local governments and HOAs operate, and that you have an understanding of the value of native plants. If for some reason you feel like you need a refresher on that particular topic, you can join us for our January webinar, which is going to be held on the 15th. We're hoping all of our webinars are going to be on the third Thursday of the month at the noon hour. And in January, our primary presenter is going to be Rachel Veal. She is the conservation horticulturist at the North Carolina Aquarium on Roanoke Island. I want to mention also that we're not using the chat function today, but we are using the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen there. So if you have a question, just submit it by clicking on the Q&A. And you'll also be able to see other people's questions that are entered into the Q&A. And do us a favor, if you see a question that you also want to have answered, just click on the little thumb icon that's there, and that was considered an upvote, and that will help us prioritize which questions that we answer during the Q&A, assuming that we have many of them. So I want to recognize that there has been a lot of momentum in our state in support of native vegetation over the last few years. Let me move something out of the way here. And I just want to note that in 2023, the North Carolina General Assembly passed the North Carolina Native Plants Act that requires native plants to be used on North Carolina highways, on our rights of ways, and state parks, and in historic sites. And also in 23, the Department of Cultural Resources adopted a policy that requires divisions and some grants recipients to use native species. This particular policy was extended in 2024 by an executive order by Governor Cooper to apply to all future state-owned projects. And it also specified the use of seeds that are sourced from Southeast United States. Then in 2025, the General Assembly passed a bill that requires the North Carolina Department of Transportation to identify native alternatives for the non-native plants that are being used in slope stabilization. Also to identify and develop a plan to remove high threat invasive species from our highways and our parks, and to not mow the rights of ways in May to protect pollinators and also bird habitat. And then We also, at the local level, want to mention a few things that we're obviously not going to discuss today. Um, Things that happened just in 2024. And at the coast, Currituck County revised their planning guidance to include more native and remove known invasives from their administrative guidance. The town of Swansboro adopted an ordinance requiring native plants in their historic district. Both of these communities used our Plant This Instead document to develop their list. So I refer you to that for a useful resource. The city of Greensboro also passed a resolution requiring minimum native plants on their city owned properties. And then for new development, both Chatham County and Cary took some actions that are noted here. And finally, the city of Winston-Salem increase their allowable size of planned and registered natural landscape areas. And this basically protects these areas. They're primarily native plants, and there are some rules to follow for them. They have to be signed and registered with the city, but it basically protects these areas from being deemed a weedy nuisance by the city and neighbors. So I'll encourage you to look into these a little bit further on your own, but I'm really pleased to move us next to our speakers that have some on the ground experience with these things. Um, so the first person that we're going to hear from today is Charles Rachi. He is the planning administrator for Pine Knoll Shores, and he helped develop their new landscaping requirements for forest management while during a recent update of their town's development ordinance. Next, we'll hear from Dora Ritchie. She is an assistant deputy director with Bald Head Association. She helps implement the planting covenants on new construction and renovated properties. And next, after that, we'll hear from Jane Harrison. She's on staff at Sea Grant. She's also on the Raleigh City Council, and where she has facilitated the adoption of ordinances to prohibit invasive species and encourages the restoration of native landscapes. Well, that should bring us to 1 o'clock. And at that time, we will hear from Christy Perrin. Well, Christy, we'll move into question and answer session, and Christy Perrin, who's also at Sea Grant and the Water Resources Research Institute in North Carolina, will facilitate that discussion. So with that, Charlie, I welcome you to begin your presentation.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Gloria, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Charlie Rachi, and I'm the town planner for the town of Pine Knoll Shores. And I am here today to talk about some of our vegetation preservation programs in town and to hear from other communities about some of the challenges that we've been facing and ways that we can improve our processes going forward. So for my presentation today, I'm just going to start with a brief overview and some background on the town, and then we'll get into some of the vegetation preservation procedures that we utilize, and then we'll end with some of the challenges that we're facing moving forward. So for a little bit of background on the town of Pine Knoll Shores, we are a coastal barrier island community in Carteret County. We are between Atlantic Beach and Emerald Isle. According to the 2020 census, we have a full-time population of about 1,300 people, and recent tourism studies suggest that we grow to about 10,000 people during the summer months. There's a lot of appeal to Pine Knoll Shores, mainly the 6 miles of oceanfront beaches, as well as soundside access. We also have the Pine Knoll Shores Aquarium, which welcomes over 400,000 visitors a year. For the residents of the town, people really appreciate the coastal community and a maritime forest that we've been able to cultivate through our vegetation policies over the years. And as development changes in the town, we're also looking to adapt those procedures as we move forward. So to understand our philosophy for managing vegetation, we can turn to the town's mission and vision statement. The vision of Pine Hill Shores is to provide an environment in which our citizens are safe and secure, where individual talents flourish, and where everyone enjoys the natural resources of the area. And that is supported by our mission, which is to provide concerted and friendly means of promoting health, safety, and social well-being by developing implementing plans for the continuous improvement of the town, and by encouraging participation of the residents to service the town and the community. We will utilize best practice communication tools and responsible fiscal policies in order to do so. Sorry. So before moving into some of our vegetation management practices, it is important to know that Pine Hill Shores is the recipient of special legislation that allows the town to enact and enforce ordinances to regulate the planting, maintenance, removal, replacement, grading, and preservation of vegetation on public and private property within floodways, reservoir watershed protection areas, and resource management zoning districts. And just for a little bit of background on why we have that legislation, this land was previously owned by the Roosevelt family and turned over to the state when it was chartered. And part of that stipulated that we preserve the natural beauty of the community, and this allowed us to have this legislation. So what does this look like in practice? The aspects of vegetation management can be divided into 5 key points, which are the town's tree removal permits, our landscape development permits for new and redeveloped residential property, the vegetation replacement reference guide, which we provide to our community, our collaborative relationships with our utilities, and the town's participation in the Arbor Day Tree City program. And for this presentation, I will go over each of these aspects and how they inform our ability to manage vegetation in the town.
Is it not wanting to move for you?
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of issue moving slides. Okay. So one of the main supporters of the town's ability to manage vegetation is the Pine Hill Shores Appearance Commission, which is an 8-member volunteer board whose role is to support the town through its tree removal permit procedures, as well as supporting the town's status as a tree city in the Arbor Day Foundation. These volunteers also have expertise on gardening and tree management. We do have a certified arborist who's serving as the chair currently. We did have a master gardener at one point, but they've since moved on. But we do have some crossover with the town's garden club for public right-of-way projects. Gloria, if you're able to move the slides, I could just
so next I can do that. Is that good?
Yep, perfect. So the town has tree removal permits, and this is a permit that we issue for the removal of all trees that are measured 3 inches in diameter at 3 feet above grade. Anything smaller than that does not require a permit, and we also exempt the trimming of vegetation and the removal of non-native species. The Appearance Commission, under my direction, is able to go out and review these tree removal permits, and they make their decisions based on the 3 criteria, which are to protect a structure or improvement on the property from imminent damage from a tree or any part thereof, to promote the growth of more desirable vegetation, and to remove dead or diseased trees. And that is the criteria that they use for determining these permits under my direction. Next slide, please. So the provision for more desirable vegetation connects to this talk on native species, because it allows us to consider the growth of native species that is inhibited by potentially non-native species as ground for approving a tree removal permit. We can also utilize this permit with tree management plans or vegetation management plans where a non-native species is to be removed, and then we could move that forward with the planting of a native species in its place. Next slide, please. Like I said before, we do have a non-native exemption for these tree removal permits. In Article 11 of our code, it states that the normal maintenance of existing non-native landscape plantings upon any lot or parcel, including but not limited to lawn maintenance, the removal, relocation, or replacement of non-native shrubs, and the cutting and removal of non-native nuisance vegetation is exempt from needing a tree removal permit. And usually we are happy to do site visits with people if they have questions about what might be native and non-native, and we could provide documentation for them to help make that decision on managing their landscaping. Next slide, please. And this is just a photograph showing what someone would do if they have a pending tree removal permit. Typically, they'll come over to town hall with a physical permit or email one to us, and then they will mark the tree on their property with orange ribbon identifying for the inspector which trees are subject for removal. And you'll see on the right side there is a tree with laurel wilt, which we've been dealing with our red bay magnolias, and then 2 scrub oaks, which have exposed root rot. So moving forward, looking at single-family development, this is the prominent development in town. About 90% of our parcels are either single-family or mixed residential zone. So much of our vegetation management is going to come with single-family residential builds. And when I'm talking to people about building a new lot, we usually break it down into this diagram below, where you've got your 4 key considerations for your development. Those are the actual structures, being your house, the driveway, and any decks or accessory buildings, your stormwater management, which in our town is primarily individual per property. We don't have a town stormwater system that some other communities might have. Also, their allocation of sewer or septic areas. About 80% of our single-family properties are on septic, and much of the property will have to be dedicated to that field. And larger structures usually means larger septic systems. And then for our town, we more so focus on tree management as a part of single-family development, and we have procedures in place for the approval of site plans with tree management requirements that we'll talk about now. Sorry. So under the UDO, we recently changed our tree density requirements for new single-family builds. Previously, it was just 2 trees per 1,000 feet of pervious area post-construction, but we ran into some challenges with that because we found that people were removing more trees and then being able to plant back at the end of the project. So we were losing a lot of that old growth under that procedure. So under the Unified Development Ordinance, we changed it from just being a specific tree requirement to being able to have credits for larger trees to be preserved on the property while increasing that credit requirement by 50%. So you see this table here. We give credits based on the diameter of the trees. And so a 6-inch tree would be worth 1 credit, up to a 24-inch plus diameter tree, which would be given 5 credits. And on this next slide, you'll see what this would look like on a site plan for a new build. On the left side, you'll see where the preservation is taking place on the property. This one is going to be on the rear. And on the right, there is an inventory of the existing trees, 3 inches in diameter or greater on the property, and what will be preserved and removed during the project. And they will also call out the species of trees, noting that palm trees will not be included in that count. And you get some unique preservation plans. This is a recent property, and in order to meet their tree save requirement, they were able to put up this retaining wall and save about 8 trees in the front yard. Now, just a quick example of how this would work out on a property. This is just example numbers, but if we were to look at a 10,000 square foot lot and there was a proposed improvement of house, driveway, and septic that would cover 5,000 feet on the property, there would be 5,000 square feet of pervious coverage post development that we would need credit for. The owner plans to preserve 3 6-inch southern red oaks, which would equal 3 credits, 2 15-inch loblolly pines, which would be 6 credits, and 1 specimen 30-inch live oak, which would be worth 5 credits. That would be a total of 14 credits on the property, in which case they would need to replant 1 additional tree at the end of the project to close out their development. Now, for that replacement tree, we do provide residents with some informational materials on what would be good species to replant, noting that we would prefer native vegetation to be included. So we developed this tree replacement reference sheet. The information was sourced from Athens Clarke County tree species list, and there was also supporting information from Paul Hosier's Seacoast Plants of the Carolinas, a guide for plant identification and use in the coastal landscape. And we've also incorporated some Sea Grant resources with this over time as well. And then just to give you a closer view of some of the information that we provide on this reference sheet, we can move to the next slide.
Got it.
Thank you. You'll see that the table will provide you the name of the species, the type of development that it would most likely support, including large landscape areas, utilities, utility right-of-ways, parking lots, buffer areas, and riparian zones. And then you can also get specific characteristics on the mature size of the tree, the leaf type, flower color, and certain wildlife value that the tree provides. So this has been very helpful for our residents who might not be familiar with some of the options available to them for the replanting. And generally, that replanting is going to be a pretty big investment for them and their property. So we want to make sure that they have all the information available to them to make a good decision.
Sorry.
Yep, and then this just goes over more detail on the characteristics that that table provides to us. Here I have an example property. This is an oceanfront parcel that did not have any existing vegetation, and as part of their replanting plan, they decided to plant 20 live oaks on the side yards of their property. Very quickly, I'll talk about our relationship with Carteret Craven Electric Co-op, our town's utilities company. We have built a strong relationship with them over the past couple of years with our vegetation management plans. This involves coordinating between their contracted tree cutting crews with our appearance commission to look at where there are problem trees that could impact utility services and come up with procedures for relocating and removing certain trees that we might want to preserve under the utility lines so that we can support native vegetation, even if it is going to impact services. It is one of those tough things that you have to manage because nobody wants to lose power for a significant period of time in an emergency situation. So we try our best to find a balance between, preserving the native species and the aesthetic of the town while also being able to provide those essential services. And Carteret Craven has been excellent in working with the town on that front. And this is just some photographs of some of their maintenance following Hurricane Isaias in 2020.
Oh. Here we go.
sorry. Very quickly, I'll talk about the town's participation in the Tree City program. We've been a Tree City for 26 years, and part of that is a requirement for keeping inventory of all trees removed and planted by the town. All new plantings made by the town are native species. We also host an Arbor Day celebration every year, and we participate in the Heritage Tree Program, where residents can submit their trees for the Heritage Tree Registry. And these are some photographs of a tree giveaway that we did in 2022. This was part of the Hurricane Florence restoration plan. With support of the Arbor Day, we were able to get 200 live oaks and give them out to community members to plant following Hurricane Florence tree loss. And there is a heritage tree application that we received recently for a live oak. Okay, so current challenges that we're facing with our tree management plan. The first is balancing property rights with community values. The next is managing vegetation preservation with more intense development pressures. And then third is educating residents on vegetation policies. And I'll talk about each of these here. So balancing property rights. The town's philosophy is that having a strong tree canopy can protect the town through stormwater reduction, wind damage reduction, and soil stabilization. And the challenge we run into is that an individual property owner might not see that benefit, but they bear all the risk if the tree falls on their house. And sometimes they'll get their home insurance involved, and then it becomes an issue for us with managing these tree removal permits. We keep trying to refine our policy to ensure that it is adaptable to all of these different situations and that everybody is treated fairly in that process. This is an example of blending community values and individual property rights. This is a new subdivision that we're working on right now, and there is a 0.64 acre natural area in the middle of the subdivision that's being preserved. And I'm running low on time, so I'll just hit this last point very quickly. Development pressures are another challenge that we're facing. Many factors for this. Real estate is becoming more expensive. The redevelopment is bringing in larger homes for the community. And with this, it's easier to regulate vegetation than it is the house size, according to the General Assembly. There's also issues with downzoning legislation that I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm sure a lot of people understand those challenges as well. And then also the state's emphasis on stormwater management being a bigger priority for communities. And this is an example of development that met the requirements of the code, but a lot of the existing tree species were removed. And you can kind of see in the front there is a retention pond that needed to remove some vegetation in order to meet their stormwater requirements. So yeah, all of this plays into our table on tree development or single family development policy. And then I just have a couple more photographs of stormwater retention systems. All right. And then finally, the last challenge we face is education through public information. We try to inform people as often as possible about the town's procedures, how it might not be like some other communities, and help people understand why we have these policies in place. Generally, we have a great community of people who are receptive to a lot of the information that we put out, and the town's volunteers with the Appearance Commission or other groups are able to spread a lot of that information through the community. And then with that, that concludes my presentation. I believe we'll be taking questions at the end. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Charlie. I appreciate that. And if you have any questions for Charlie, please make sure you put them in, in the Q&A box, so we can get them, so we can review them before we move to that Q&A session at the end. And in the interest of time, Dora, we welcome you to take over control of the slides. And if it remains finicky, we can just move to you telling me next slide.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gloria. And thank you, Charlie. That was absolutely educational as well. My name is Dora Ritchie. I am the Assistant Director for Landscapes or for Bald Head Association. And we constantly are focusing on our landscaping commitments and our natural habitat that we try to preserve here. Much like Charlie's situation, Bald Head is also a barrier island. Barrier islands tend to make up that 13% of our coastline, and most of that is pretty much nestled into our North Carolina area. That being said, we, like a lot of other barrier islands, are constantly fighting erosion with what comes with waves, currents, tides, sea level changes, hurricanes, that kind of nature. And that's a lot of that is just it's just the community reacting because there's not much we can do about a good deal of what nature throws at you. What we can do about is what man throws at us, what that development procedure comes from. So we have managed to put into play a good bit of teamwork on our island. A little bit about Bald Head Island is that in Brunswick County, nestled right below New Hanover County. The only way to access the island is by a boat or by ferry. So just kind of a little picture into our lives. Anyone who works here gets on a ferry in Southport and 25 minutes later is over here in beautiful Bald Head Island. We started off as a extremely small community, branched out from the Mitchell family. In 1975 was when the original POA started. And moving on from that, BHA, or Bald Head Association, took over in 1982. Later on, we also had our introduction to the municipality of the village of Bald Head in 1985. So they tend to take on more of those governmental functions, whereas BHA is more focused on that advocacy and just managing the amenities and the aesthetics of the island. One of the major portions of the aesthetics of the island that we really do focus on, though, is our land preservation. Let's see if I can get this little guy to work too. Starting to see what Charlie was having problems with. Next slide. All right, so why landscape protection matters for BHA. Bald Head Island, like I said, is a barrier island, so we do have a very fragile ecosystem that is also very extensive into whether you're looking at our dune systems, at our wildlife that is all over this island. We tend to want to safeguard our massive tree population, our beautiful live oaks that we have that are just huge and gorgeous. We also are constantly fighting to keep the understory sustained. We do a lot of education around that with our homeowners to let them know that, hey, while this looks like a bunch of weeds to you, it's supporting an entire ecosystem and it is keeping our ground solid when those massive rainstorms come in, and it keeps that flooding at bay. So one of the things that we tend to focus on is we do go alongside with our community. So we have our village for ordinances that we tend to match up with when it comes to our design guidelines. We also go alongside with the Bald Head Island Conservancy. Those gentlemen and ladies are out there every day doing tons of data and research that does help back up a lot of the choices that not only does the village of Bald Head make, but also the Bald Head Association make for its homeowners and its members. Those things where we're protecting our homeowners, but we're also protecting a lot of bases that we have here. We have a rather large amount of loggerhead turtles that tend to have nesting seasons here. We have a lot of shelter in place for birds, and deer, the massive amounts of alligators that you'll see going around in the area is just, it's absolutely beautiful. And it's something that we try to fight every day to sustain. So that next slide. So Baldhead's top priorities, or Baldhead Association's top priorities, are revolving around protecting. We like to protect our existing native vegetation. It was around preserving our island's natural dune, our forest, our maritime ecosystems. We do try to keep that erosion and mineralization down to a very small amount. So we're not constantly worrying about renourishment as much as we're more worried about just sustaining what we have. Um, we also work with the village to ensure that the stormwater management is under control, along with upholding very strict compliance and accountability. It's probably one of our strongest suits that we have is, you know, your roles are only as strong as your ability to sustain the roles. So we do have a good bit of strict compliance when it comes to what you can remove, what you cannot remove, and the consequences that come from that mindset. Next slide. All right. So what makes us a little bit different? We are, as an entire association and also an entire island, we are nature preservation first. So we tend to keep our, even with our new construction, you know, you look at our neighboring in Southport, you'll see a new construction comes in, wipes out, builds the home or the business, and then plants new vegetation. We are all about keeping the vegetation that we already have and building around it. Probably one of the coolest things I saw when I first started working here was to be able to go into a building site and see that you could barely see the building site from the road because of how much vegetation was preserved in the build concept itself. We stick to a strict of minimum trimming. You don't know anybody on Bald Head that owns a lawnmower because we do not have that. Our backyards are created out of what's already there, whether that's woods, whether you're looking at marsh, or whether you're up on the dune side. We do restrict what is planted on the island. Every landscape plan that is submitted through the ARC is 70%, has to be at least 70% native, 20% NC native, of a 10% exotic, along with a long list of invasive species that are not allowed to be planted on the island at all. We end up doing the tree flagging and evaluation process. It's as simple as filling out a form as a homeowner saying, hey, insurance company says this tree needs to be taken down, or hey, I'm worried this tree is looking old, or I would like to, you know, have something inspected on my property. We have staff go out and inspect it. We also have an arborist that we work alongside as well. And this is a two-step process where the association takes control of that first step and then moves on to our director for the, our building development director for the village of Bald Head. And he also is on that process to take basically two eyes on these trees to make sure, A, is this tree needing to be removed? And if it is needing to be removed, what's the best process for that? And so on and so forth. All of our landscape changes are required for ARC approval, whether you're building a brand new thing or whether you have a home that you have just purchased off of another owner and you want to and the last thing that makes us different is our community is extremely passionate. People move to Bald Head because they like what it brings, what it offers. It's not about entertainment as much as it's about that slowing down of the pace and being able to enjoy nature all around you, and to be able to have that very little light pollution at night, so that you can look up into a star, you know, the stars in the sky, and to be able to enjoy nature, see a deer walk across the street, and be able to have that massive, beautiful canopy when you're driving down the roads of Bald Head. Which is also one of the reasons why, if you look, Bald Head does not have very many internal combustion engines on the island. We mainly are all golf carts here. So it ends up keeping our roads a little bit smaller, which helps us helps us upkeep that canopy, and it also keeps a lot of that pollution off of our island. Next slide. All right, so we have two sections of ARC requirements that you could break it down to, and that's going to be our new builds and that's going to be our sustained renovations. So with new builds, we tend to have when you're going through a process of a draft preliminary and a final and final applications through our ARC, there's a lot of discussion that goes revolving around that lot safe. Obviously, as anybody, we end up looking at certain trees that have to go out because you've got a house in the middle of a lot. You're going to need to take some trees out, but we have we have classes throughout the year along with webinars, and we also have one-on-one where we're happy to sit down with any new architects and contractors and anyone who is in the profession that does have questions, or even members and homeowners, what it takes to sustain the trees that are on the properties. We end up having higher, we have requirements for our silt fences and sand fences, along with very strict limits of disturbance. We aren't allowed to go anywhere above a 40% grading, including that limit of disturbance, which means if you step outside of that limits of disturbance, that's when the violations will kick in and you're required to have a mitigation for any of the wildlife that you have disrupted outside of those limits. We require that the laydown areas are chosen ahead of time and approved, and you're not allowed to go outside of that material laydown area along with your dumpster location. There are several inspections throughout the build process once this is approved. And during each one of those inspections, the vegetation protection is probably one of the highest things on our inspection checklists. Next slide. And so the other mention that we have of our ARC approval requirements would be more or less upkeep and renovations, things of that nature. As before, we would rather preserve a tree. The understory is extremely important. Our ground cover is what keeps us from having a lot of flooding issues. We continue on that removal with the ARC review and flagging of the trees. There's no clearing allowed in any of the HOA common areas. If BHA common area is having anything cleared out of it, lots of people would like to do that to get a better view of, say, the ocean, the golf course, even just a beautiful marsh layout. That's not allowed. There are certain measurements to take in to do what we would consider, an cutesy name, a peekaboo view, but we're not allowed to have that clear cutting. And there's a higher rate for the violation fines and standards for mitigation on that end. Tree topping is prohibited. When damage is done, we expect it to be restored with 100% BHI native. And next slide, sorry. So what does it take? So we have rather strong regulations here, and we have consistent enforcement. As I said in the beginning, your rules are only as good as those you have to enforce them at the end of the day. We also have a very close coordination with not only the village, we also have it with our conservancy that's on the island. Bald Head Association has several committees that make up volunteers that are just as passionate. We have our beautification committee. We have our education and resource committees out there. Just like Charlie had mentioned, our beautification and restore committee, they go ahead and they put on a reforest once a year where we sponsor bringing over a large amount of BHI native trees that can be purchased by members to either put as honor trees on the island in common area, or they're allowed to plant them in their own areas as well. We host that every year. We also work closely with the village, who also has different types of gardening clubs and committees that go out and have made us the Tree City USA, and have also had us apply for our Bee City USA as well. Participation and buy-in is probably our biggest tool. Is if you can get people excited about that preservation and fall in love with what makes this island different, then it's easier to have those people let go on that fight to have the bigger property, or to have the bigger house expanded on your property, or to want your driveway to be a certain way, and versus maybe turning it a little way to avoid. We've really tried to push out more education and just excitement for our homeowners, our members. we tend to struggle a lot in the same way that I think a lot of people have since COVID. There's been a massive move out and move in turnover, right? And that involves pushing more education for those who haven't been here before and don't understand that a lot of what makes Bald Head special and beautiful is actually the people who are here and what they choose to do with their environment while they're here. Um, so that's pretty much what we have done here on Bald Head. We tend to try to keep our design guidelines for our ARC and our tree restrictions updated on a every other year basis to reflect what's already in our covenants. That way, to give it a more clear and concise standard, we start seeing in our ARC meetings was not quite understanding this 40% grading the way they used to several years ago. We can go ahead. We still keep that 40%, but we have a better way of explaining it to help our new builders understand and our new homeowners understand that while we want to give them the best dream home that they've ever had here, we also want that dream to stay alive and preserve what makes Bald Head different and beautiful. And that's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dora. I appreciate that unique perspective that the Bald Head Island has. And thank you also for being patient with the slide advance and getting us back on time here. So our next speaker is Jane. And Jane, I'm just going to hand it over to you. You let me know if you want me to just advance for you or take control.
Yeah, thank you. I'll let you know if I need any help. Good to be with you all today. I am representing kind of two things here, wearing two hats. I do serve on Raleigh City Council, so that was why I was invited to talk about some of our local policies that are related to invasive species control and native plant priorities. But then I also work for North Carolina Sea Grant alongside Gloria and Christy, and I've been part of the Coastal Landscapes Initiative since it started. So I want to, really, I guess, shift the conversation a little bit to a different context. What Dora and Charlie are able to do is just phenomenal in their communities. And I will say the city of Raleigh, we have quite a different population size. We have different authorities. Charlie had mentioned sometimes there are special state authorities that different communities have, and that does very much shift what can be done, particularly in private development or on private properties. So let's see if I can move this slide forward. You might have to do it, Gloria. And there's one element at a time on each of the slides. Okay, so yes, I will be going over the policymaking context for the city of Raleigh. I will also be talking about, click again, our invasive species program, and you can just do a few more clicks, two more.
Okay, and you may have control now. Just FYI.
Our leaf out program, which is our tree preservation and planting program. And then finally, there we go, what I'm calling potpourri, which is just random great things we're doing in the city that are related again to invasive species control and native plants. Next slide. So the policymaking context here, I serve again on the city council, but I also chair our Growth and Natural Resources Committee. So that's a group of 4 city council members. We get together as needed to explore land use and environmental topics. One more click. And what we do is we're able to recommend policy then that goes back to city council. So you can see us all sitting here from my last term on council, and I'm still there, but we've got a different group. And, this is just a wonderful opportunity where we get to work with our staff in more detail on environmental topics, and then again, bring recommendations back to the entire council for consideration. Next slide. And you can go ahead and do 4 clicks. So I've got 4 items here. These are recent policy and budget wins since I've been on council, which is since 2022. So in 2024, we did commit $500,000 for invasive species management with external vendors for the first time. So before this, we were doing all of our work internally, and we didn't have, a lot of staff to do it. We do depend on volunteers quite a bit, and they are wonderful. We have volunteer opportunities every month, and this is again going to be on our public lands where we have more control. So our parks, our public right-of-ways. But by having external vendors, all of a sudden we were able to, contract in 2025 for 28 Raleigh Parks and Greenway sites and do invasive species control there on 90 acres. So it really upped our capacity, and I'm excited to see that because we have a lot of land that we have to manage. We are also finalizing an internal policy to encourage the use of native plants in parks, public right-of-ways, and other city land. So similar to what we heard about in Greensboro, where they've got the 50% native requirement. And then also we're initiating this tree planting and preservation plan called Leaf Out, and I'll tell you more about that. Next slide. Great. So our invasive species program, it's part of the city's natural resources unit, which is within our parks department. And the idea here is to manage infestations, prevent introductions of invasives, and then provide educational opportunities to residents. So I've been involved over the years with volunteer activities at my local park, Lake Johnson. I go out there with the high school students from Athens Drive High School, and we're taking care of kudzu and privet and Japanese and Chinese wisteria, and this stuff just grows and grows and grows. So we always have a job to do out there. Next slide. And so when you think about Raleigh, again, a city of 500,000 people, we have a lot of potential sites to manage. And we have recently added a new, more standardized structure using GIS to map those invasive plant populations in our parks and greenways. So we have a new coordinator of the invasive species program, an assistant coordinator was also hired, and you can see some of our previous control sites where they are. And so really any site that we take on is going to need some ongoing maintenance, and we have to, make sure we're going to be available for that. So we don't want to kind of start everything and not be able to keep up with it year after year. And so you can see we did do 10 what we call internal projects in 2024. That was before we had the 500K to get the outside vendors to come in. So we'll still do some internal projects by our own staff, but we really, I think need to focus on having some of that contract authority to make sure we can get to all the sites that need it. Next slide. Yeah, and you can go ahead. I think it's about three more, one more. There you go. So this is how we prioritize where to do the work. Do we have a threat to native biodiversity? So what is our threat level to native species and communities, rare or uncommon species? What are our opportunities for ecological lift? Can we improve habitat and ecosystem processes? Can we maintain what we start? So we've got to be able to ensure control again year after year. Can we control impacts to natives? Can we get to the site? How is the access? Are there other benefits, perhaps, of doing invasive species management? So can we improve sight lines for public safety or aesthetics? We obviously have to look at the costs of each project. Do we have the labor, the equipment, the capital available? And then finally, location. So we want to make sure the distribution of the work is equitable, that we're not doing it in one part of the city and never in another part of the city, or only in the places where people know about invasives and tell us, hey, I want you to work in my park. We really want to make sure that it is going, everywhere. Next slide. So this Leaf Out program, this was a really exciting initiative that came directly from residents. So it was referred to the Growth and Natural Resources Committee after we had a study done, Wake County, showing 11,000 or so acres of tree canopy loss in the county from 2010 to 2020. And so this is a picture from the Growth and Natural Resources Committee where we had, I don't know, 50 or so residents turn out to say, hey, we need to do something. We're losing a lot of trees here. And we don't have the authorities that, maybe Charlie or Dora have, when it comes to private development. So I'll just give an example. My neighbors cut down every tree in their backyard one day. That's allowed in Raleigh. It doesn't matter whether it's native, non-native, whether there's a potential damage to someone's home, it's completely allowed if you're under 2 acres. So we have very limited tree conservation ability on private land. And so this is really an effort to say, how are we going to keep the tree canopy we have and plant it out in our public spaces. So right now, the Parks Board, Sustainability, Wildlife, and Urban Trees Committee, they are working on a plan with the Parks Department that'll come out next year. Next slide. And you can click a couple things here. Yeah, that's good. So this is again non-regulatory planning. So we are not going to be telling a private property owner what to do. Rather, on our public lands, we are going to be looking for more opportunities to protect our trees, particularly those native species, sensitive habitats. We want to expand the canopy and the habitat connectivity, wildlife corridors. And then we want to bring the public, in and make sure that they are part of our stewardship efforts and the philosophy, and that we can increase environmental education in the city. You can see our seal there. We're known as the City of Oaks, and we want to keep it that way. Next slide. And so just to kind of finish off with a couple cool little, I'd say, projects or examples of how we take, some of the philosophy around the importance of native plants, in other programs in the city. This is something that was just developed this year, and it's a living installation artwork at Dix Park called Memory is a Hearth. And it was designed and planted by landscape architect Preston Montague, and it is to restore native grassland ecosystems. And it's really part, ecological restoration, part public art. And there's doors all around because this was the site of homes. The Dorothea Dix Hospital had many homes where people lived, for folks that were working there at the hospital or living there. And so we're trying to show, what is the history of this land? Where have we been? But then also kind of creating it anew with this living artwork. And I just saw Preston had posted, you can buy this particular native species mix. He calls it his bespoke, I think, urban parks mix or something like that. And he wanted to make sure that there was going to be flowering plants, color from the get-go, because sometimes it can take obviously a few years for native grasslands to get established, but then there's other species that will come, in the following years. So I think it's going to be really fun to watch this, and it has just such a prime location in the city to kind of, again, inspire and give people more examples of what could I be doing in my yard besides perhaps turf grass or crepe myrtles. Next slide. We also have in 23 Raleigh Park locations certified monarch habitat. So these are pollinator gardens, primarily, if not all, with native plants. And they're just really fun little spots to go and check out. There's a list of them on our website, the city's website, and you can see so many different kinds of flowering plants. And again, some inspiration, I think, for ideas for what you can do in your own yard and on private property. And the final slide here, I've got one more. This is I
Nope,
think.
that's it.
Hmm.
That's all I
Well,
have.
that's okay. We lost one, but that's all right. I just want to give a shout out, and it is to our Raleigh Rainwater Rewards program. And that particular program is something where you can get 90% of your costs covered. And it's to put in, a cistern or a rain garden, something to help with stormwater. And we also encourage native plants with those particular installations. So I was actually, when I was campaigning, running for city council the first time, I was walking around all these neighborhoods, and I just remember going past the most beautiful little garden, front yard garden with, native asters and goldenrod. And, I knew it was something. I was like, I wonder who did this. And I talked to the neighbor, and, they had used the rainwater rewards program through the city and then put in all these native plants. And they were, much more kind of dealing with their stormwater issues in a healthy way. And again, I think providing that inspiration for the rest of the neighborhood. So we have a lot of programs that are going on, but everything really for the city is generally has to be some kind of an incentive structure or a voluntary effort. We only have so many authorities when it comes to telling people what to do for what kinds of trees or plants to use.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. I assume that you're wrapped up there. I appreciate you bringing that book into this topic in a way, from the coast to the inland area to much from a little bit less developed to pretty heavily developed. And I think one of the things that that sort of hits home for me is the importance of managing the invasive plants before you yeah, yeah, before you have to invest a lot of money and time and energy in removing them. There was also one more slide. I was going to, hmm, maybe might be able to put it back up, that has contact information for all of our speakers because they have graciously agreed to answer any questions that you may have that may not be answered during the Q&A. So I'm going to bring that back up. But Christy, can you go ahead and just for a minute, can you go ahead and start the Q&A session? And I want to thank all the speakers for coming, for preparing and presenting. It takes a lot of work to put together a presentation, and also for Christy and Jane and our communications team for helping advertising and set up the webinar, and for everybody else for attending. So, Christy.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed those presentations. We had a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask our panelists to be brief if you can in your responses so we can answer as many of them as we can in the 13 minutes we have left. So Charlie, I'm going to start with questions that came up during your presentation. So you can unmute to answer them. First is, how is non-native nuisance vegetation defined by Pine Knoll Shores?
Sure. So we have a few nuisance vegetation species that have been called out in our code, specifically Virginia creeper and other oceanfront dune vegetation. Generally, if there is a threat for a species to spread that is not listed in our non-native species, we could use that for consideration as a nuisance vegetation as well.
Great, thank you. There's a question about what are tree density credits in Pine Knoll Shores. I know you touched on that some.
Sure. So that's just the size of the existing tree, the value that we'll put on it if it is preserved post-construction. That would give additional credit for larger trees that are preserved during the project. And also, if those trees are lost during construction, there would be a greater replanting requirement to meet that. For example, if a 25-inch tree was to be removed, you'd have to have 5 trees planted back to supplement it.
Thank you. And who in Pine Knoll Shores does the development plant marking?
The property owner will mark trees on their property, or the builder or surveyor will mark it for a new construction build. The town will mark for trees on public right of way.
Okay, so these are still questions for you, Charlie.
Okay.
Would native plants, native shrubs and ground covers count towards credit requirements for development, or is
No,
it just trees?
it's just trees for the replanting requirement, unless by our definition for 1 inch diameter, or I'm sorry, 1.5 inch diameter at 3 feet can be met by a shrub, but otherwise it would not be included in that credit.
Okay. And in the case of preserving trees, someone noticed in the photo with the retaining wall that that may have impacted root systems. So they were concerned or questioning, wondering if there were provisions for preserving some or all of the root system, or is preservation solely based on the trunk diameter?
We did include new provisions for critical root system protection, and that is generally 1 foot of clearance for every inch in diameter. However, if an owner came to us and proposed a root cut that would preserve it more on one side, we can be flexible with that in the review process.
Okay. Still questions for you, Charlie. Has there been, this is about power lines, has there been any consideration of relocating power lines below ground to eliminate interference with tree canopy?
Yes, people in town have asked for that for years. We've tried convincing Carteret Craven to look for a program that would allow us to do it, but the costs are just too much for that transition. The new subdivision I showed, Roosevelt Reserve, will have underground power just for the subdivision, though.
Thank you. Um, do you make recommendations on size of trees for replanting to homeowners? And this person comments that Cooperative Extension recommends smaller trees, saplings, as they accommodate faster, require less labor, and are less expensive.
Yeah, so for replantings, we have to require 1.5 inches in diameter at 3 feet. However, our table does provide information on what size tree would be good for replanting and what species might not be suitable for planting at that size. We always recommend people can plant smaller trees, but for our procedure, that won't really work. And there also is a self-correcting factor by having that size requirement, because an owner will be investing more with those new plantings, so then they'll have greater incentive to preserve them.
Thank you. And what if the site is not a good site for trees?
We do have variance procedures for unique lots. We really haven't run into that situation since I've been in the role, but I could see where some lots there might be unique challenges.
Great, thank you. Um, what year did the UDO, that's the Unified Development Ordinance, change happen in Pine Knoll Shores that required the tree credits with new development?
That was adopted in November of 2024. So we've been working with it for about a year now.
Right. And do you manage both public and private trees in Pine Knoll Shores?
Yes, trees in the public right of way will be subject to the same requirements as private trees. Generally, we're not removing them unless there's some sort of infrastructure threat or it's
Okay,
dead.
cool. Thank you. We had a couple questions for you. People were interested in how you're measuring success, how you're determining like if there's areas that need tweaking in the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that, and one of them was actually from Roy Brownlow, who is my predecessor's predecessor. So cool to see him online today. Yeah, so there's several performance indicators that we can utilize to know how our procedures are going. We always log the number of tree removal permits, the number of violations that we have, community complaints, and visual preferences surveys that suggested people like preserving the old growth, and that led us to make the policy change to give additional credit to existing trees. Interest will keep changing over time, and we'll keep trying to monitor. I'm sure my governing board probably hears a lot of that feedback sooner than I will. and they'll make sure that we're um, optimizing as best we can.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so have some other questions. Dora, when were tree removal permits in Bald Head Island first required?
Can you repeat that for me?
Yeah, the question is when were tree removal permits first required? So I guess when was that program started, perhaps?
So we've always kind of had it be required when it comes to any type of new development. It's part of our ARC. It's a part of our ARC guidelines and part of our process. Concerning when it comes to homeowners with these, it's been required through a village ordinance for some time. The village reached out around 2018 to get some more assistance with BHA to help with that. We had more able bodies, so to speak, that weren't doing necessarily town management that could come out and do those inspections and help. We don't necessarily issue it as much as an official permit, so to speak. It's more or less an inspection followed up by a follow-up letter letting them know whether this is something that can be removed or whether it has been denied for removal. And they have the ability to request a reconsideration.
Thank you. Another for you, Dora. What kind of staff do you have for enforcement? Are there any
For
full-time positions?
we are a staff here at BHA of 10. Three of our staff are actually full-time dedicated to ARC and ARC regulations, which would include a lot of our landscaping. We also have a communities director who does a lot of our sub-associations, but she is also part of our tree special, and her and two different arborists that we consult with outside of our association are also here to do any type of consultations. And all four of those specialists are full-time.
Thank you. Okay, this is a question for both Charlie and Dora. What kind of feedback do you receive from builders and developers?
I think it's a mixed bag with developers. Generally, a lot of people who work in town, they are understanding of our rules, and I don't think they're trying to do anything malicious. But they also understand that a mistake can be pretty costly. So it's important to be communicating with the town on your project and if anything changes for your project. But generally, developers are pretty responsive to our policies and our understanding of it.
I think it's about the same here. We have, like you said, a mixed bag where you do have some people that are extremely frustrated that the style of how they choose to do their operations on the mainland versus how they do them here is definitely more difficult. Given the barge, it's also a lot more costly for them to build here because they have to have those shipments for their product brought in at a smaller rate. Um, we generally work alongside our contractors. Like you said, mistakes are costly. They're sometimes a very expensive learning curve to that when it considers in our construction deposits and what can be taken away from them when the mistakes are made. But for general population of our contractors and our builders and developers, they are all eager to learn how to avoid those kinds of things. And we have a very open communication policy in our office. Come up if you've got a question that you can't quite get your mind around, or you would like to change something in your plan. Come up, talk to our coordinator about it, see where we can start working on that process. We've had amazing builders come in too and just be like, hey, this is what it looked like on our site survey. This is how we're doing things. We went to clear the land, and here's two oak trees that were missed on our site survey that maybe missed in the office. Can you come out and help us kind of brainstorm how we can work around this 30-inch oak, and things of that nature. So I mean, I think we do run a pretty collaborative little community here.
Mhm. Thank you. There's a few questions still, so I'm trying to poke around for ones that our panelists really are the experts on. One is Charlie, does Carter County or other coastal towns engage with Pine Knoll Shores, excuse me, related to policies around native plants, invasive, stormwater management, so on. So I guess is there a regional kind of discussion or approach?
Not so much with the native species discussion, but we are involved with other communities on stormwater management through our regional hazard mitigation plans. And there's also been some connection between the both banks towns in the past relating to the town's water system and the well programs. But in terms of native species, there could be more collaboration in the future.
Great. I'm going to pull up a couple broader questions for y'all since you're all here. With a changing climate, are you planning for changing plant palettes? And if so, how are you doing it? So things change. The region USDA classifications change. So is that under consideration?
Okay. Not at the moment here.
Any thoughts?
I mean, I'd say we try to be adaptable to changing conditions. There's no point in being restricted to the point that it hurts us, but I'd have to understand a little bit more what's being referred to.
Understood. So we are at 1:15, which is when we said we were going to end this. There are a few questions left. So what I'll probably do is send those on to our panelists. We have the names of who's asking those questions. So want to thank everybody for participating. Thank our speakers for sharing what's happening locally in their communities. We are recording this and we will post it on our website and send it to registrants. So any last words, Gloria?
I don't have any. I just thank other than to thank everybody for participating. And I was really impressed with the questions and the answers that were provided. And hopefully people will be inspired and get some information to take more action locally on their own.